I'm Charlie Bright of Gold Derby, and as part of our Meet the Experts TV documentary panel, I am speaking with Bao Nguyen, the director of the Netflix documentary film The Greatest Night in Pop, about the coming together of the We Are the World single. The first question I wanted to ask was, what was your first exposure to We Are the World, and what did you think of it when you first initially heard it?
Well, thanks for having me on. I was only about 2 years old when the song came out. And so my memories are a bit hazy, to say the least, of when the song came out. In the process of making the film, I started reminiscing about my memories of the song. And it really started in my household. My parents were Vietnamese refugees who had just recently come over to America. And one of the ways that they sort of tried to assimilate into American culture and learn English was listening to American pop records, such as Lionel Richie's records, Kenny Roger records, and then the We Are the World record. And so I just have fond memories of hearing these songs in the background, including We Are the World, growing up. And in many ways, American pop music, pop culture was this bridge between my parents' Vietnamese background and my own upbringing as a young Asian American boy.
So was there, what's really fascinating about the movie is that is hearing all the different individual stories of all the different, artists that were there, something that, it was worthy of what you would hope something like that would have. And I'm curious as to, was there an aspect of the story behind the song that you were very surprised to find?
Well, I think just sort of working through the archival with my archival producer and editors, um, just seeing how vulnerable and nervous a lot of these icons were. I mean, we're talking about the greatest singers of multiple generations, not just one. We have Ray Charles, Stevie Wonder, Michael Jackson, Diana Ross. I mean, I could spend the entire conversation listing everyone off, but to see them enter the room and be in awe of each other, and also having to sing a line in front of each other was something that I think many people could relate to. Lionel Richie said it in the film, that it felt like the first day of kindergarten. And I think we can all connect to the idea of going into a room that's a new, surprising, and often very anxiety inducing, as you could see, I think specifically with Bob Dylan, who felt very uncomfortable. I just seeing that footage was really eye-opening to me.
Um, I think the other thing that really surprised me about it was how was the humor that we saw with a lot of the stories, and I was wondering, was that something that when so many of those stories went in that direction, did that surprise you, or was that something that you kind of thought might be part of the story?
Yeah, I would say that we always wanted to make a film that was joyous and humorous, and you can kind of get lost in sort of conventional um, behind the scenes process films, but when you add that air of humor, I think it makes it much more engaging for the audience. And we were fortunate enough where we had Lionel Richie in a way be our narrative anchor, since he was there from the conception of the song to the very end. And he's just an amazing storyteller, but also he's just like the funniest guy ever. I was watching an interview with Will Ferrell recently, and Will Ferrell was like, someone asked him who's the funniest person in show business, and he's like, this is an unlikely answer, but if you meet Lionel Richie, then Lionel Richie, you know why Lionel Richie is the funniest guy you'll ever meet.
Um, were there any participants who were tough to convince to be a part of this project, or had a tough time opening up about it?
I mean, I would say that art was imitating life in many ways. Bruce Springsteen didn't originally sign on to the song right away. He had to kind of get convinced for different reasons. And I think having Bruce, he was preparing for his tour. It's sort of the opposite, where with the song he was ending his tour. This time around, when we were making the film, he was preparing for his tour, so he was super busy. but Lionel just gave him a call and said, you got to do this. So that when you have Lionel Richie making the phone calls for you, it's very helpful. And uh, it was a bit of a logistical crapshoot in many ways. Most of the interviews were shot at A&M Studios, which is now Henson Studios in Los Angeles, and that's where the song was actually recorded, and that was really important for us as storytellers to kind of bring everyone back into that space. But it was impossible to get Bruce back into that space, so he was one of the few interviews that we came to him over on the East Coast.
Um, uh, Going back to some of those stories in there, I'm curious. I asked which ones which ones surprised you, but I'm curious also as to whose story in the film got to you the most in an emotional sense.
I would say a couple people. I think kind of answering your previous question too, the most surprising maybe was Sheila E. She really opened herself up and said quite frankly and straightforwardly to us that she felt used in many ways. She thought that some of the people behind the song were using her to get to Prince, and I think that's in the heat of everything that's going on in the politics of trying to get the biggest names, that might have been the case. And she had mentioned that that was the first time she ever shared that sentiment on camera, and something that she'd been holding back for the last almost 40 years now. And that was a very emotional interview, I think, for many people, including her. So that was very surprising and heartfelt. I would also add um, Lionel's line. It's the very end of the film where he talks about returning home, and he quotes his father. And I'm paraphrasing here that when you return home, the house is still there, but the people in the room are not there. And that's how he felt going back to A&M Studios in many ways. And when I first heard him say that story and that quote, I knew that was going to be the end of our film, just because it was so moving, and I think it really tied everything together.
And what I always find really fascinating with documentaries is, I know that you capture so much material in telling the story. And what I was wondering is, were there any stories from about the recording that you really enjoyed, but you weren't able to include in the final cut of the film?
I think one of the things that we wanted to kind of convey more was the impossibility of getting Prince there. And for a long time, we felt, I think as we were editing the film, we were worried that we were staying too long in the recording studio, and that we kind of jumping out into LA looking for Prince was a way for us to kind of get away from the claustrophobia of the studio. Um, but we realized that the footage inside the studio was so incredible that as a viewer, you want to stay in that room, you want to be with all these people. So we did cut out a little bit of the Prince story. Obviously it's still there, but it's definitely shorter than the original version that we imagined, because you see these great icons in a room together. You realize like that's documentary gold in so many ways.
I just have to ask. I mean, when you do a documentary like this, I have to wonder: were you ever? Did you ever? I know you probably wanted to be as professional as possible during making it, but did you ever find yourself being completely starstruck by any of the when you were in the presence of any of these people?
I mean, for me, I think we interviewed Bruce in his home, and I think walking into Bruce Springsteen's home and his studio, his farm is a bit sacred in many ways. But at the end of the day, everyone was so humble and approachable and down to earth, that you're just talking to someone sharing a story at the end of the day. It's not the icon Lionel Richie. It's Lionel Richie, the 30-something-year-old trying to pull off the impossible song. And I think for me, that's an important part of the film, is humanizing these icons that people think are sort of out of reach, or that aren't human in many ways. And I think as you see in the film, as you see through the process of making the song, that we all share these anxieties, these vulnerabilities, and hopefully this hope to kind of make something for the world to make it a better place.
Well, Bao, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on our panel in just a little bit.
Great, thank you so much.